So what we wanted to go through tonight is seek your input on what's called the Source Water Protection Plan. This is a plan that the BWS has had in development for a couple of years now. You're going to get an overview of that plan, and really, you know, we've got a couple of questions for you. I think that you'll find that really interesting. Then we're going to do a review of the current Water Master Plan, which it's hard to believe that that was actually adopted by the board back in 2016. And here we are in 2024, and it's time to update it. We'll review the notes from meeting 50, and then Ernie's going to educate us all about the public safety power shutoff issues and also any other updates on BWS. So that's the plan for this afternoon. Any questions? Okay, opportunity for public comment on anything on the agenda. All right, seeing none, let's go over and talk about the Source Water Protection Plan. And as part of that, let me welcome up Mark Chun. Mark is the Assistant Water Resources Program Administrator, and also Bill Fernandez. Bill Fernandez works with me at CDM Smith.
My name is Mark Chun. As David talked about, I work for Barry. That's usually the way I describe myself, and everybody knows Barry, so I work for Barry. I'm here with Bill Fernandez, and we're just going to be talking about our Source Water Protection Plan. Now, we're two of actually a team of people that are worked on this particular project. We just have the opportunity to go ahead and present it. Now, as Dave had mentioned, we have been working on this for a couple of years now, and a lot has gone into it. A lot has gone into it, for sure. So our presentation objectives are this. First, we want to review the development of the Source Water Protection Plan and the results, because it was actually a very involved thing, and I kind of want to manage expectations that we're not going to end up with a book that ends up on a shelf that we never use, but at the same time, we also don't have a magic bullet that is going to immediately solve all of our problems. So we want to kind of take you through some of that. The second thing is we want to go ahead and discuss some of the major takeaways. And a lot of things we identified throughout the entire process. Again, it was a very complex issue, and as we kept going through it and working with our stakeholders, we realized that there are a lot of things that we had to address that maybe we never thought we needed to address. And the third thing is, Dave talked about, is we seek your folks' input. You know, potentially, all the potential enhancements that we might have. After you hear some of our what we call our best management practices, the results that we want to go and take forward. We want to see if we caught everything, and if there's something maybe we missed. And so we have some specific questions for you regarding that. Are there any BMPs or next steps that can be enhanced? Now, at this point, you have no idea what we're talking about, but that's what we're looking for. Right? And are there any other potential threats, BMPs or next steps, that we should consider? And you guys offer a wide range of thought process, parts of the industry, parts of the island, parts of the community that maybe we just didn't take into account. So we would love to have your input on that. Best management practice. Now, in a classic sense, that usually means you put a gutter buddy in to keep the mud from going somewhere. This is a more of a broader context, and actually Bill will be talking a little bit about it, I believe, on one of the slides on what that actually means. So it's more of a broader context of things that we recommend that we should. So let's go through the development summary. Now, one of the questions that came to mind is, why are we doing this now? Or it seems like, why are we really working on a Source Water Protection Plan now? And the simple answer is that we have threats all over to our water supply. There's contamination threats, as all of you know about. We've got things that have been poured on top of the soil. We've been finding it as we dig down. The picture over there shows us fixing a main break, and oil comes out of the ground as we're trying to fix that, which isn't good. We all know about drought. We know that that's becoming more prevalent, and so we're concerned about that. And then there's climate change, the overall idea of sea level rise, which then goes and affects our aquifers, it affects seawater intrusion into our aquifers, and all of that results is that our limited aquifer that we all know about, that resource is even more tenuous, it's more threatened than before. So even more so, we have to make sure that nothing goes ahead and gets down into it and damages it. And we need a lot of water, as you folks know. We have a large and complex water system. We need something in the neighborhood of about 145 million gallons of water per day to serve roughly 1 million people across all of these different types of facilities that we have. So it becomes very important for us to preserve our water resource. Now, we're not the first to be doing any kind of source water protection type of plan. There's been a long history by federal and state and actually city agencies kind of highlighted here. And a few of them that we want to point out is like in 1972, there was a Clean Water Act. In 2004, and this one we referred to a lot, the State Department of Health did a source water assessment program, SWAP as we like to call it, and we refer to that one a lot. All the way up to 2024, or actually 2022, when we started us with our source water protection plan. Now, the guiding principle behind this is simply this, that the prevention of sources from degradation is always preferable to mitigation and cleanup. Thus, reducing risk is the foundation of our source water protection plan. So what's our objectives on this? The first part is to proactively understand this risk. We're going to leverage a lot of the previous work. Again, we were not the first. A lot of great work was done by a lot of the programs before that, so we're going to kind of take into what they had. We want to develop a framework for a long-term program. This isn't a real quick fix. I wish it was, but it's not. It's something we're going to have to work on, so we need to set up this long-term program. We needed to understand the Board of Water Supply's regulatory role. And that's an interesting one because it becomes very complex. And as the more we poured into this, we realized various different agencies have different regulatory roles. So what is the board's role in all of this? We wanted to assist in the fulfillment of our responsibilities. And as you can read up there, to protect the quality and the quantity of water resources used or expected to be used. And the last one, the fifth one, and I can't overemphasize this enough, is to identify opportunities for interagency collaboration. And I'm going to see that several times over, that one of the things we really learned as we went through all of this is that we have to work closely together with all our other agencies to make sure that this overall program to protect the water resources on the island actually can happen. We need everybody. We did talk to a lot of different agencies, roughly about 13 agencies, federal, state, and city. We had 5 stakeholder meetings, in which each meeting we kind of talked about, this is what we're thinking of doing, this is our thought process. Do you guys have any input on that? Are we approaching the right thing? We started looking at every single one of their regulatory roles. With the team, they went through all the different rules, all the different laws, and laid it out there into a matrix to say, all right, as far as we understand it, your guys' role is to do this. Your role is to do this. Are we right? Are we wrong? So we had to go ahead and go through all of that, look through the various process. Again, collaboration was critical for that. And then, because we have such a wide variety of stakeholders, we had to make sure that we had consensus on what it is that we're working at. And fortunately, it was easy to do because it hits at a very personal level. The first one that we looked at was that the protection of the groundwater is part of everyone's mission. And we all knew that. That's true. We all get caught up in the details, and maybe we lose that sometimes. But when we really get down to it, we know it's all part of our mission. Everybody agreed to that. The second one is that there's an unprecedented amount of funding that's available, especially to the federal government. Now, tapping it, how to tap it and all that, that becomes part of the trick, but we know that it's available somehow, some way. Again, collaboration is key. It's critical. It's just such a complex issue with so many different regulations. We all got to work together to do this. Fourth one is One Water. You've all heard the term, and basically means all the water is connected. Gone are the days when we can say that we just produce potable water, we put it out there, and we don't worry about it after that. No, water's got to continue in that cycle. Whether it be storm water, whether it be sewer water, somehow we got to go to make use of this drop of water all the way through the cycle. And the last one, of course, in water reuse is encouraged. Again, part of that one water cycle. We can't just let it go out to the ocean and not make full use of that water. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Bill to continue on with the details of the actual program and describe what it is we did. Bill?
So I'm going to start off my portion of the presentation talking about the source water protection planning process. And so there's 4 steps that you see up here, and they build on each other. And as we go through the results later, we'll talk about what steps these results came out of. But we're going to start with, the first step was to identify risks. And the risk of potentially contaminating activities, like a cesspool or an underground storage tank or something that can cause groundwater contamination if the containment fails. So the risk that we looked at for these various PCAs, potentially contaminating activities, was based on its proximity to BWS source wells, the probability of contamination, so how likely it is to fail, and then the impact that that contamination would cause. So those three things were considered. The next step was to identify BMPs to address the risk of these PCAs. So what we did was review existing laws and regulatory responsibilities. We took a look at the existing BMPs and the aspects that they covered, and then we identified the gaps. So where more BMPs or where more additional work was needed. And then we came up with a number of additional recommended BMPs. From that, we compiled all of these BMPs into projects, what we call projects. And those were based on, if they're addressing a common PCA type, a common source of contamination, whether they're in, the BMP category. So if they're all sort of public education or all of that same category, then they can be lumped. And a key one was the agencies involved. And so, if a lot of them have the same Department of Health, then it makes sense to group those into projects together. The last step was to prioritize the BMP projects, and that was based on how easy they are to implement and the impact that they would have on mitigating the risks. So just to give you an idea, you guys have probably seen this before, maybe many times, but just to give you an idea of the sort of range of BWS sources around the island. The graphic on the left shows the contributing area for each of the supply wells. So this is the area that if contamination were to get to the groundwater in this area, then eventually it would end up at a BWS supply well. And we usually think about contributing area or capture zones in terms of time it takes to travel to the supply well. And so we looked at, in this study, a 2-year and a 10-year capture zone. So we looked at the PCAs or the contamination activities that existed in the 10-year and the 2-year capture zone. So the first step was looking at a number of PCAs, and these plots show 2 common ones. So there's a graphic of cesspools on the left and underground storage tanks on the right. Through these 2 graphics, you can kind of see both, the breadth of these PCAs, right? So the number and how widely distributed they are around the island. Other PCAs that we looked at included Superfund sites, RCRA sites, abandoned wells, historical ag, where pesticides were used historically, chemical storage sites, and historic landfills. And we'll go through those and how they compare to each other in a slide coming up. Approximately how many PCAs do you think we identified on the island of Oahu? The winner so far is 10,000, and followed by 20,000, and it's actually the numbers between those two. We actually identified 19,000, just above 19,000 different PCAs around the island, and this graphic shows most of them, like a select number of them, so it didn't get too busy. But about 10%, 15% of those 2,700 were found to be located within 10-year travel time of a BWS source. So those are that we really need to focus on. But it is also clear that you do have to look outside that 10-year zone, right? Because all of the other, the 80%, 85% of other PCAs are still important. They affect groundwater either at a longer time interval than 10 years, or they might be impacting other groundwater wells or ag wells. So it's still a concern, something to track. In order to understand the risk involved with each of the PCAs that we found, we started off with some categories, risk categories, and it builds from medium, high to very high. And Mark mentioned the 2004 DOH study, and those categories came from that study. So there is that continuity. But based on what's happened since 2004, we decided it was important to add an extremely high category. And this is for higher risk sites like large RCRA sites, large leaky underground storage tanks.
You've said RCRA twice. Can you tell us what RCRA is?
It's linked to Superfund. It's a kind of similar to Superfund, where it's a Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. So that act defined a certain level of contamination that elevates it in priority for the federal government. So we have that extremely high category, and we had to use the score ranges because we're trying to figure out, okay, how much risk, compiled all of these PCAs, how much risk do they present? And if we have a scoring system, then we can look at, okay, all of the PCAs that are within a certain well capture zone, where are the most likely wells to have some contamination impact. So that's the purpose of building this sort of hierarchy of risk for each of these PCAs. And this just shows a graphic. You can see the relative score of these different PCAs. So some of these make sense. Risk is increasing as you go to the right. So single-walled underground storage tanks are going to be less risk than tanks that have or are currently leaking. And they're going to be less risky than this large, very large underground storage tanks that have the capacity, tanks like Red Hill have the capacity to, create a lot of groundwater contamination. So these are the spread of the different scoring. There were some PCAs where we looked at a range of scores, and so those are shown here in the colored bars. But basically, same thing where we look at risk increasing as you move to the right. So septic tanks are going to be a little lower scored than cesspools. Because septic is a better way of containing contamination. And then these other bars of PCAs, these basically show that there's a range based on the size of the PCA, so landfills, based on acreage. Agriculture that uses pesticides, those are based on acreage. So that's how we sort of looked at the different sizes of PCAs within these different categories. So to compile all of the data that was created in terms of the PCAs, and we looked at their locations, we looked at where they were in relationship to the different BWS source supply wells. So we took the score that was created with the risk categories, and we multiplied it by proximity to wells. So if it was within 50 feet, then we multiplied it by 3, and if it was in the 10-year capture zone, we multiplied it by 1, because the sense is that 50 feet away is a much more immediate threat. And I'll say again that for the extremely high-risk category of PCAs, we looked outside the 10-year capture zone to look at if there was risk from these large, risky contamination categories, even outside that 10-year capture zone, to look at the full aquifer. So another question, which PCAs do you believe are of the greatest concern? You can choose up to 3, and the choices are Tier 2 chemical storage, so that just means a chemical storage site that has 10,000 or more gallons stored. Improperly abandoned wells, landfills, leaky underground storage tanks, cesspools, historic pineapple and sugarcane cultivation, and again, that's pesticide use, and underground storage tanks. Yeah, I think your responses make a lot of sense. This is certainly very close to the way that it lined up for us, with leaky underground storage tanks, landfills, and historical ag being at the top of the list, and then cesspools close behind. We actually asked this same question at one of our agency stakeholder meetings, so people like EPA, DOH, and others, and this is their response, which is very similar to yours. So there is a consensus of, we're hearing news about different potentially contaminating activities, and there is that consensus. People are very well educated on what are the most impactful things we need to worry about. So this is a table of the PCAs that are driving the highest risk capture zones. And You know, they sort of line up with the survey. Certainly, historical ag and landfills are at the top. And this is the number of PCAs within that BWS pass zone. I didn't point it out on the figure earlier, but the BWS pass zone is the interior of the island where the regulations on wastewater disposal systems are prohibited, basically, to conserve and protect the groundwater aquifer. So these are relative sizes of numbers of these different PCAs here, but you can see that within all of the capture zones, this is the contribution for each of those. So, you know, these numbers are all relative, and for a single capture zone, you know, the highest risk score that we got was something in the 2,000 range, 3,000 range. So you can see that, you know, these are certainly high contributors to those numbers. So one of the tools that was requested very early on in our stakeholder, again, the agency stakeholder process, and Mark touched on it, was the roles and responsibilities of these different agencies and where they would chime in on mitigating different risks and addressing certain PCAs. And so we developed a matrix that connected water quality programs and mitigation efforts to the federal, local, city, and state agencies that oversaw those different programs. And so to get the most transparency out of this effort, we used different categories for our agencies. We have originators who are sort of the overseer of the regulation or program. We have a permitting or enforcement agency category. We have agencies that are consultation required, so they need to review permits or applications under those programs. And then we have agencies that just want to be informed, and that's just in the spirit of data sharing. So this just shows a snippet of the table that we created, and it shows, you know, there's some different environmental policies: Safe Drinking Water Act, Hawaii Environmental Policy Act. So these are different policies and acts that govern how source water quality is maintained, tracked, and monitored, and addressed. And these are the different agencies, so EPA, so the different federal agencies that are involved: Office of Water, Office of Land and Emergency Management, and then Department of Health. DLNR is a player in a lot of these different policies. So this really helped increase the transparency of what agencies' roles are. And when there is a problem that arises, who is responsible to work together to collaborate to address these issues. Now we're moving on to best management practices. So this is where we really want to get some feedback on whether or not these make sense to you. So just a primer on BMPs. There's a lot of different kinds of BMPs. These are actions, you know, BMPs in this sense are actions that can be taken to reduce the human impact on land and water resources. So these are all different categories that we looked at. They range from education and outreach to interagency coordination, the collaboration that we were talking about, and data collection or funding support for programs. So I'm just gonna skip to a few BMPs just so you guys can see how we built this. So the first one, we're addressing individual wastewater systems, right? So these are septic systems or aerobic treatment units. We're working with the DOH wastewater branch and the Department of Environmental Services. And so there are some current BMPs that govern how you can build these IWSs, individual wastewater systems. So BWS has in their rules and regulations that they have to be approved by the manager. And in the Hawaii administrative rules, there's some guidance that they have to be at least 1,000 feet away. And in another part of the guidance, they have to be a 1/4 mile away. So there's some flexibility, you could say there. So really, when we're looking at the different BMPs that exist, we notice that there are some gaps. And one of the gaps is for a large property that has multiple of these systems, maybe the minimum distances are not sufficient. It's also unclear which minimum distance you should actually use. There are some variance procedures that are undocumented. And when you're looking at these systems that are replacing sewerage, it would be useful to understand where the sewer system was going to be expanded. So it makes sense to connect to sewer instead of building one of these. So the potential BMPs for this IWS is to document the variance procedures, clarify with DOH if we should be using the 1,000-foot or quarter-mile buffer, and a permit review process to confirm future sewer plans with E&V. So abandoned wells I wanted to mention because that's an important one that ranked pretty high. So abandoned wells are wells that have been, nobody is using and they're sort of forgotten. A lot of times we don't know exactly where they're located, but they produce, they create a conduit between the surface and deep aquifers for contamination. And so there are some rules and regulations that dictate how an owner must seal the wells. Commission of Water Resource Management, they have a process to find abandoned wells and seal their own requirements for sealing. But there are still a lot of gaps left. There are still a lot of abandoned wells in BWS capture zones. Some of these could be used for monitoring the groundwater instead of just sealing them. And there's also a gap that owners may not have funding. And so the potential BMPs address that with an interagency program to find these wells, seal them up, look at if they could be useful for monitoring, and also to provide funding or support for locating and sealing these abandoned wells as needed. So we talk about major takeaways. We touched on this. Agency coordination was key in this process. One of the biggest takeaways was data sharing and how siloed the cataloging of data and storing of data is for the city. And so sharing of data, GIS, or databases was really important. Public communications, like this one, to educate folks on the importance of protecting the water supply is a major takeaway, as well as looking at those aquifer-wide concerns even outside of the 10-year capture zone, and then utilization of existing funding. So to implement the source water protection plan going forward, we found that it was important to create a point person for each agency so that they can continue to meet, to talk about projects that they could collaborate on, and really to identify opportunities to implement these recommended BMP projects.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Mark. So Mark started off asking a couple of questions, looking for your feedback on what you saw as BWS has been developing this source water protection plan. Looking at, keeping in mind that source water protection is really important to individual communities, that source water protection is everyone's responsibility, right? We all have a role in the activities we undertake each day, how we manage water, how we treat it. And then the idea here is that as the source water protection plan advances, updates will be provided to you. And so there were a couple of questions that Mark started with. Are there anything coming out as you listen to this that could be enhanced, anything in the next steps, anything in the evaluation? And then are there particular concerns that you have on source water protection that come to mind that you want to make sure we're aware of? So I'll open it up to you. Cynthia.
So last night I was at the Waianae Sustainable Communities Plan update meeting. And one of the things that was identified in the draft that we're going through now was there's a lot of community desire to be able to go hiking wherever, whenever. And so my input was two things. One, they were not taking into consideration the impact of hiking versus the hunters that are already up in the mountains. And number two, reminding everybody that when we were growing up, we were always told, you don't go in the mountains except for gathering rights, because those are our watersheds and that's where water comes from. So I think one of the BMPs or partnerships that need to be considered is that messaging to the public in general, as far as not just where the source wells are located, but in general, the watersheds and the entire island structure, if you will, and how that affects the aquifers, whether it's a direct source impact or an indirect source impact. And if we're going through the sustainable communities plans, it may not be a bad idea for BWS to be involved in, at least to the extent that they can also raise the concerns from a water standpoint to any of the sustainable community plans. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, great point. Mark, any comments or questions on Cynthia's suggestions?
I was just gonna say that's actually a very good suggestion. You're right. Thanks for the input too. That you've been hearing that the community just has the idea that they can go anywhere that they want to, and that's a big issue for us, especially like in the Makaha area, to manage anybody going into our watershed areas. So that's a good thing we should add into our messaging. So thank you for that.
Other comments or questions?
I will say real quick, sorry,
Yeah.
Dave, that a portion of the source water protection plan looked at what we call non-point sources and how we can address those in a sort of a watershed viewpoint. And one of those is, we looked at feral animals. You mentioned hunters. That's an issue in some of the watersheds. I don't know if we looked at hiking and the impact of hiking, but yeah, that might something to follow up with. Thanks.
Great. Others?
One more.
Yeah.
And Barry knows this one, because when the Mohali Kawai organization was first starting out, one of the things that we partnered with the BWS about was trying to locate where all of the abandoned individual wells were located in the Waianae district. I went through and sorted out who the new owners were, what properties and what have you. BWS actually sent a survey out to all of the people that we could identify that supposedly had wells on their property. And we got a very, very dismal response. I think the response rate was less than 25% of the 240 some odd wells that were identified on the Waianae coast, of which only 10% knew anything at all about whether they had a well on their property or not.
Yeah.
So the one thing I did not notice in here, and maybe you're working with them, is that data is available at Seaworm. And that's where we got the data to partner with BWS to try to find that information. But I would submit that there's a lot of abandoned wells that are not sealed properly, especially in the older rural agricultural areas where people just drilled wells for their local farm, household use or whatever.
Yeah.
So I would think that that's a big source problem also. And I didn't quite see a lot of that here. Thanks.
Thank you for that anecdote. We have the database. The database that we've been using, but as you know and Barry know, that's on a parcel basis sometimes, and it's hard to find them within the parcel, right?
Yeah, no update on that. Thanks for bringing that up. So the Water Commission hired a the geologists to field survey as many as they could. And as you, considering what you said, they couldn't find a whole lot, but they did find several of them. And then they've obtained a grant, 2.4 million, to go ahead and seal wells. This is statewide, but they're asking, should we and can we seal some wells on Oahu? And so if we have a prioritized list, right, we have locations of abandoned wells within the capture zones. And so we want to share that list with them and see if there's specific wells that they've found and they have earmarked for, targeted for sealing, and then let's go ahead and seal them. So it's going to be a long process, but at least that was the collaboration between the agencies as we went ahead and did this. So, and then one last thing about the forest, and I understand that we also have to recognize that we live over our drinking water. So it's not just the forests, right? It's in the urban areas, central Oahu, Mililani, that's over in the no pass zone. So all of those best management practices, the education of includes where you live, but also when you start going into the forest. And there's other issues around habitat, forest health, streams and stuff, but thanks for that.
Aloha, Elizabeth.
Hi. This is all really particularly interesting because I live in an area where we're going through conversion of cesspools, and it's a no-pass zone. And so we know now that they're going to be working with Hawaii American Water. But question is, when land use changes and there are abandoned wells, and you know that they're there, what happens to those abandoned wells? And should Board of Water Supply have the opportunity to first see if it's of value for something? Or I'm just kind of curious about that. If
Somewhere in, as we were talking about BMPs, I know there was a lot of discussion about should there be some permit review process that's instituted on parcels that may have an abandoned well. Maybe you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, we did talk about having this review for abandoned wells as part of a building permit process. So if they're building on land, and it's in a parcel that has been designated as having one, that they, have to do some surveying to find it. So that's one of the BMPs that we looked at.
is that in play? Or you're working towards that? Or
We'd be working towards incorporating that, yeah, because it's not a part of the review process right now.
okay.
Yeah.
But then usually for development, change of land use and stuff, Board of Water Supply tends to, is consulted. So if they look in their records and they see, they could flag it if they know, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. I will say when you look at these abandoned wells, they, besides not having a lot of information for them, some may be useful and some may not, based on the depth, the age, right, all of those things.
Yeah.
So those all come into play in
course.
terms of
Okay.
resuscitating them. Yeah.
And
Thank
it really should be also the responsibility, Elizabeth, of the landowner, the property owner, to seal the well properly. I think we need to review our we have some really dated rules and regulations still with when Board of Water Supply was responsible for enforcing well sealing in Honolulu. So maybe that tied in with the Water Commission's requirements, but I don't believe right now it's part of the building permit review process. So that's a good point. Thank you.
All right, great input. Anything else? All right, well, thank you. Great work. Okay, we're gonna go through an overview of the Water Master Plan. And it was 2016 was a long time ago when we undertook this Water Master Plan effort. And so as we were thinking about where to start the discussion of the Water Master Plan update that BWS is starting the undertaking of, we thought, well, why don't we go review where we were back in 2016? And so I'm going to show you the presentation that was developed to show the results of the Water Master Plan. And we'll go through it quickly and then start talking about what's coming up. So it's a long-term Water Master Plan for our future. Oh, by the way, you can tell how old it is because everything's in the 4x3 format instead of the 16x9 that we're also used to now. So that's why everything's cropped on the sides. We are, as was talked about with source water protection, we are all water stewards, regardless of what we do. Barry pointed out, right, we live over our source. BWS sustains, captures, treats, moves, stores, and delivers 145 million gallons of water every day. We work with partners to protect the source in our watershed, take only what is needed and do not waste it, produce 8 million gallons of recycled water every day for use in irrigation and industry, as opposed to using drinking water for those purposes. There's a big conservation success story here. If you look at the orange bar, that's population, and it's going up from 1980 to 2010. If you look at the blue bars, that's the amount of water produced, and you can see that's going down. Today, compared to 1990, about 10 billion gallons per year are now saved as a result of these conservation efforts. But BWS then asked, as they're again asking in embarking on this Water Master Plan update, are we prepared to provide safe, dependable, and affordable water for the next generation? And so they undertook this Water Master Plan. I don't know if any of you remember, but that photo is of the mural. This one's in the engineering building, right? Beautiful piece of art. Some of you were there when we actually had a stakeholder advisory group meeting in that building, and I remember Ernie showing everyone the mural. It's really amazing. So that BWS master plan looked ahead 30 years, evaluated the entire water system, identified necessary improvements, all while thinking about the balance of needs with the cost of providing water to our customers. And since we just went through that rate study update, right, that idea of balance between meeting the needs of the system and maintaining affordability for customers is a really big deal. One of the things that, as you look at population projections and water use and you look island-wide is that, in some areas population is going up and water use is expected to increase. And in other areas, population is going down and not much change in water use was expected. So this was an important element and looking at it geographically. Now, you've seen this graphic before, right? BWS water system is large and complex, and actually I think it was in the Source Water Protection Plan presentation. So another quiz for you all. We've blanked out a few of the facts and figures here. The first question is, on average, how much water does BWS serve to its customers every day? All right, the correct answer is 145 million gallons per day. All right, next question. How many miles of pipe are in the BWS system? And most people are saying 2,100 miles. That's correct, 2,100 miles of pipeline in the BWS system. Good, great recall there. I hope that was a little fun to look at. As part of the Water Master Plan, BWS conducted a comprehensive condition assessment across all different types of water infrastructure. Here you can see a robotic investigation of the inside of a reservoir, the structural evaluation of the external of the reservoir, active work looking at leak detection, and then the top photo was the testing of some technologies that go inside of a pipe to evaluate the condition. So a lot of different things were done. Some good news about water main breaks back in 2016. Their number was on a bit of a downcreasing trend. There was an analysis of the entire system for its capacity to handle the water needed for the 2040 population. This is a kind of an overview of some of the hydraulic modeling that was done and the extensive network of pipes throughout the urban area. Climate change and other trends were factored into the plan's recommendations. This chart is showing, with the orange line, a decline in rainfall, long-term decline from 1920 to 2010, and then the green line showed the shorter period of 1980 to 2010, a 23% decline over 30 years. We're going to be looking at those again as we update the Water Master Plan. Major recommendations of the plan were to develop new drinking water supplies for Ewa, Waipahu, and Honolulu, to double the amount of non-potable water produced. Most of the pumps were found to be in good condition, but some needed to be rehabilitated, and then building some new ones where needed. About 90% of the 171 reservoirs were found to be in good condition. There was the need for additional storage in certain areas and the need to replace a couple of reservoirs. Renewal and replacement of high priority pipelines and installing new pipelines to add capacity in areas of greatest growth. This was a major finding. And then another recommendation was to continue the current capital improvement program budget of $80 million per year, which I see Ernie's face going, wow, that was small compared to what we're spending now. So we certainly continued spending $80 million a year since then, right? And then to ramp it up as needed, all right? So check, got that one done. Then the next steps back in 2016 were to develop a 30-year capital improvement program, and you've seen that many times. It's this pretty colorful chart that shows all the different types of projects and the investments required in each of those different types of projects. We talked a lot about this as we were going through the rate increase work just a few months ago, right? So the biggest band is the brown one at the top. That's new and replacement pipelines. Between 2024 and 2029, that's expected to be over 41 miles of replacement or new pipelines. And then you can see that big gold band. That's the other big one in the current CIP, and the emphasis on that is new sources. Right? We talked a lot about those issues previously. The other element was developing a financial plan and a rate study, which may result in adjustments to water rates. Well, that's certainly been the case. We've been through 2 rate studies together now. The most recent one, the implementation of new rates that began in January 1st of this year. Another rate increase just happened on July 1st, and then there's these successive rate increases going out through 2028. So all approved by the BWS board, all vetted and with your input, and really appreciate all that continuing effort. But it's time to update that, right? A lot's changed since then. This graphic is showing, in the outer blue circle is that last comprehensive water master plan. And the idea was that we would comprehensively assess the system needs, which was done, do some evaluations and complete the development of that plan. And then every 3 years, go through a process of updating the 10-year capital improvement program. And every year, advancing the 6-year capital improvement program and implementing the 1-year program. And now it's almost 10 years later, and it's time to come back out into the outer blue circle. Again, assess the system needs, update evaluations, develop a new long-term water master plan, an updated 30-year capital improvement program, all of those things. So what's changed since 2016 as we start to think about it? Certainly, COVID has impacted water demands and BWS revenues. We've talked about that many times. We're all well aware of the Red Hill contamination, the need to focus more on sources and diversification of supplies. There's been the necessity to change operational strategies, not only in response to Red Hill, but with respect to the need for ongoing conservation. There's climate change adaptation, the development of in-stream flow standards, and new regulations, new water quality regulations around things like PFAS and the lead and copper rule revisions and things like that. So a lot's really changed, right? So what are the things that we're going to be looking at moving into this Water Master Plan update? Revisiting some elements of the condition assessment, redoing the water demand forecast, looking again at the water source evaluation, updating the assessment of water quality and regulations, taking an updated look at climate resilience planning, capital improvement planning, financial planning and funding, and then ultimately producing a new water master plan and scorecard. So let's talk about some highlights of this. On the condition assessment work, we're really focusing on not going and reassessing everything from the beginning, but we did a pretty comprehensive evaluation. So actually looked at every one of those 171 reservoirs. So let's now go take a fresh look at, say, the 15 most critical of those, use some different technologies, not only, not take the lift truck and go hammer the reservoir all the way around like we did, but instead let's use some drone technology and compare the results of what we're seeing to the previous investigation. And then from that, we can understand how are these reservoirs degrading over time, and what does that tell us about where we should focus any additional condition assessment efforts. So really trying to leverage that more comprehensive data set and then hone in on the most critical things now. Taking that same approach and applying it to other types of infrastructure also. So why do this? Really understanding that rate of degradation will improve maintenance and replacement timing and make sure that BWS is getting the most out of its assets. There's also a big goal to reduce unaccounted for water, right? The BWS measures the amount of water pumped out of its sources, and when you compare that to the amount of water that customers are charged for, the difference between those two things is unaccounted for water. It could be due to breaks and leaks in the system. It could be due to the way that the data are stored or transmitted into the systems. It could be due to inaccuracies in water meters, in the measuring devices, a whole host of things. But the troubling part is it's been creeping up over the period of time, and it really needs to be looked at here. The best practices for water utilities are to have an unaccounted for water number down in the 8 to 9% range. So we want to work to bring it back into that range. Part of it will be developing a high-level information technology and operational technology strategy. BWS already does a ton of work on information technology. This isn't to replace any of that, but to make sure that at a high level that's linked with the capital improvement program planning, with operational needs, and really it recognizes that these technologies are changing very rapidly. We start to think about, most water utilities are starting to think, well, how do we implement AI, artificial intelligence, into to simplify things, to make things more operationally reliable, to dig into all that data that we've gathered for years and years and years, and more efficiently analyze it and see what we can learn from it. So lots of opportunity there. I mentioned the water demand forecast, and updating that forecast is going to be really, really important. So we want to look at those demands over time and also by area, right? The BWS those demands are different in different areas, and the changes are going to be different as we move from area to area around the island. We want to consider how expansion of water sensible conservation rebate and additional conservation programs could impact demands. And why do we want to do this? Well, really that per capita, per person demand and population projections, those have changed since COVID, and understanding those changes and how water demand patterns have changed is really going to be critical going forward. Water source evaluation, you are no strangers to the issue of water quality, particularly as it relates to our underground aquifers. One of the things that we are going to be focusing on, in addition to those types of contamination events that Bill and Mark talked about in the source water protection plan, is doing a detailed evaluation of chlorides and pumping rates. We're going to start with 15 sources based on their criticality to meeting the system demands and existing water quality conditions. We'll complete updates of the water shortage plans and then coordinate with the Honolulu One Water effort to make sure that there's integration of the different needs and opportunities coming out of that effort. Really, as you knew from the rate study, the issue of increasing source reliability is really paramount to addressing potential degradation of source quality and quantity. Part of this will include an evaluation of additional and alternative supplies. I've mentioned water conservation already, non-potable sources. You've heard discussion about the desalination efforts. Also be looking at new groundwater sources, the potential for indirect and even potable reuse out into the future, and of course stormwater capture. So really a lot of different opportunities to look at and think about, what does the future look like for these things as we look out 20, 30 years into the future. Drinking water regulations are continually evolving. I was looking back through some old presentations. I recall Irwin doing a big presentation on the lead and copper rule revisions and the extensive efforts that were going to be required by BWS to comply with those regulations. EPA is now on the verge of adopting what's called the lead and copper rule improvements, which means more regulation, and it makes Raylene cringe to think about what are we going to do in that regard, because it's even more cost and more requirement. You've heard about PFAS before. We've talked about it, how it's in everything that we do, right? It's on nonstick cookware. It's what keeps our waterproof clothing waterproof. It's what keeps the cheese on your Big Mac from sticking to the paper. It's in all sorts of things. And as a result of that, it ends up in wastewater. All wastewater has PFAS in it. Just a fact. And so that gets out into the environment. In some parts of our country, there's actually PFAS in rainfall. So it's really a ubiquitous, it's everywhere contaminant, and it has significant health impacts. 1,2,3-trichloropropane, or TCP, a contaminant of emerging concern. Other things, microplastics you hear about. So these regulations are all changing and impose costs and drive the need for projects and further evaluation. So we'll be looking at those and what impacts they have. But I want to point out that doing these water quality evaluations and thinking about the actions to take really requires a lot of coordination before you come up with a project. You decide to go do X. And it's not just looking at the water quality regulations, but it's also thinking about the source water protection plan presentation that you just saw, looking at the water shortage plans and the impact of overpumping on chloride concentrations, looking at, I don't know if you all remember the risk and resilience assessment that BWS did, looking at what happens if you lose a major piece of infrastructure. How do you continue to meet the needs of the system? Looking at all those things in a coordinated, integrated fashion is really paramount to addressing these water quality issues. So we'll be looking at that. And then I mentioned climate resilience planning. You know, really the issue of climate change impacts BWS sources. It impacts the ability to meet in-stream flow standards. It impacts water quality, and it has impacts to other major infrastructure. And the elements of climate resilience planning are going to look at not just the impact of climate change to reductions in recharge, but also seawater intrusion as sea levels rise, the actual sea level rise event itself and its impact to infrastructure, And then, of course, thinking about things that have been much more in the news, high wind events, wildfire, flooding, those types of elements all be considered. We took a pretty comprehensive look at capital improvement planning last time, and the Water Master Plan will do that again. There's another important element we've talked about before, but it's how does that capital improvement program and the ability to not only deliver it, but also to maintain that new infrastructure, what's the relationship between that and workforce planning? So that will be an important element. And then you're very familiar with the financial planning and funding elements, given that we've done 2 rate studies together now. So there'll be an update to that. And for those of you who remember the water system facilities charge, the one-time impact fee, we're going to try and get that done. So really important elements there, right? You can't get any of this stuff done without having the means to pay for it. Ongoing public communications, an ongoing element of public communications. I think back to when we started the first Water Master Plan and initial evaluations, and Kathleen was actually part of the Stakeholder Advisory Group, and now she's just helped build an incredible organization in public communications in the information office at BWS. So great work there. Finally, documenting all of this in a report and scorecard. And Barry, maybe you can chat a little bit about the scorecard for a second. I know we've talked conceptually about what might need to be updated. I think the last time we reported out on, the scorecard has different metrics across all these different areas: sustain, capture, treat, move, store, and deliver. I think the last update was in 2021, but what are you hoping to accomplish with an update to the scorecard?
Yeah, maybe a more realistic view
sorry.
of the scorecard. There's goals objectives that we thought we could meet, and there's a lot of reasons why we couldn't meet it at the rate that we thought. Main breaks have increased. Talked about workforce challenges, the capacity to deliver. We got the funding side, but those costs have gone up. I think the good news is that I think overall source production has gone down. It would be interesting to see how that relates to the current 2020 census population, although that was masked by COVID, so a lot of people left or anyway passed away and stuff. So, so that affects our efficiency of the per capita demand. I think reuse has still kind of plateaued, and although we still have those plans. So we're moving in a lot of fronts, but the pace of that has been less than I think what we anticipated. But we'll take a better look at it, or a closer look at it, and see where we fall. And as we start to set those objectives, I think it needs to be realistic objectives, but that's where I think the feedback is important. Do we need to, we should identify those indicators that really got to move the needle, yeah. So that's going to be an interesting effort. You remember Ellen Hirayama? Ellen Kitamori, yeah, she retired in 2021, so that's why the last scorecard was 2021. And that was her baby. Anyway, but yeah, it's important because we need to be able to identify those key performance indicators and measure our progress against that. So, thank you.
Yeah. Thinking back on that last master plan, is there anything that you think we should have done or need to do differently as you look ahead and the BWS embarks on this update? And the other part of the question is, are there any issues that we haven't covered or touched on today that you think it's going to be important for the Water Master Plan update to address? Yeah, Elizabeth.
Random comment. There have been some new laws in place through governor's executive order, all having to do with housing. And at the ledge, like the one that says you could take your house down and subdivide it into small lots and put tiny homes. I'm mentioning it because I'm wondering with this housing movement, and creating more density and kind of potentially doing away from single-family residency, how that impacts the planning for Board of Water Supply. So I'm just mentioning it because it may be something we want to think about when we move into this update.
Yeah, it's a great point, and this isn't the only geography dealing with that, right? California's been doing a lot of housing densification, allowing accessory development,
Right,
accessory dwelling units in areas where they never would have been allowed before. And what does
Correct.
that, how does that change water demands? And is that showing up in the official population projections at this point? I'd venture no.
Right.
So there's some really interesting issues around that, I agree. Thanks for bringing that up. Cynthia?
Other thing that I know at work I've been facing this a lot is this whole conversion of cesspools to other treatment facilities. Some of what we're faced with is if you want to upgrade your house, you have to shut your cesspool down, and if there's no sewer line in front of you, go to septic, and then eventually at 2050, you're still going to have to hook up to sewer whenever it goes past your house. But that's also an opportunity for BWS in the sense that if more water is being diverted from cesspools or other sources like that into the sewer system, like Honouliuli, is there more of an opportunity for RO, R1 type water to utilize for non-potable drinking needs like watering dam parks? You know, which is the whole idea that we were trying to do when BWS was looking at turning the Waianae wastewater treatment plant into an R1 water. Our problem is water's too salty, even after secondary treatment. So, but if we're going to be diverting all of that water from cesspools, which just filter into the ground and put it into these sewer lines and sewer plants, I'm not saying BWS take over the sewer system, believe me, but is there an opportunity to partner with that since more water will be going in that direction,
So-
should be going in that direction?
Yeah, so I think that's a great example of one of the things the One Water program is intended to accomplish, right? Is looking at ENV's projections of wastewater flows and how those change as they move towards those sewer improvement districts and their implementation, and then what does that mean in terms of an additional recycled water opportunity? That type of collaboration is built into this to make sure that happens. Excellent point. Any other thoughts on this?
The time about the Board of Water Supply, and I tell them I don't know if there's another public agency that even created a 30-year plan. And now you are taking the 30-year plan and you are evaluating it and moving it forward another 30 years. And you are showing us some of the successes that you were able to accomplish, and that is the, you know, the pipe repairs that you do, the number of miles, all these kinds of things. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to pat ourselves on the back, you know, and I hope that you don't have to give me 20 points of assessment, just maybe the top 5 or something, and saying, okay, we said we were going to do this, we're this far ahead, and this is what we're planning out. You know, I think that not only would the public
we get more of the public to understand the enormity of the job, but also other public agencies will say, well, what is our plan? And we have a 5-year plan. And have we done anything about assessing the 5-year plan? And I swear, a lot of them write the 5-year plan and they don't ever assess it. You know, they never think forward. And I would like to do that. I would like Kathleen to, you know, point these things out to the public.
Yeah, I know the entire BWS team appreciates your words and your thoughts on that, and the recognition, so. Cynthia?
The last item that I have is, and you're going to be presenting it here a little bit later, is this whole PSPS thing that's going on out there. I hope that we're going to roll that into this plan, because the Waianae area does not meet the standards for reservoir volume. As it was stated to me a long time ago, 1.5 times the daily use, to be able to not only accommodate for major water disasters and breaks, but also to be available for backup for fire. So I'm hoping that we're going to toss that in here also. And I know right now Hawaiian Electric and whoever else is involved in that PSPS plan, the only area that I've seen on a map is essentially the Waianae district. So I'm advocating help.
Yeah.
You know, I want to make sure that we have the resources that are required, because it has been identified and targeted as a high potential area.
Yeah, great points. And I know Ernie's going to talk about that. All right, anything else on the Water Master Plan update? Thank you all for the input. I think, as you can see, we've got a lot of exciting stuff to talk about and address over the next couple, 3 years together. So with that, Ernie.
You know, I couldn't have asked for a better transition to the subject. Thank you, Cynthia. But before we get into public safety power shutoffs, which is PSPS, and you know, Sherry is a member of our stakeholder advisory group from Hawaiian Electric. She's not here. She's probably not here because she's working really hard with the rest of the HECO team in preparing the plans and measures that they may implement this year or in years to come. So for Red Hill, though, just right now they're moving into closure mode. They've actually started to clean out, I think, 2 of the tanks. They've got 14 total tanks to clean. They've removed 104.7 million gallons out of Red Hill from being right over our aquifer. Now they're working on cleaning out the sludge or residual fuel in each tank, and it'll take them a few years to do it. So 2 tanks are under cleaning mode right now, and they'll be doing that for a while. Next steps would be removal of the pipeline that connects the tanks to Pearl Harbor. One thing to watch out for, we're entering a transition to now really make sure that they are aggressively pursuing identification of where all the fuel and other contaminants, including PFAS, is located in the underground aquifer, and to move toward trying to clean it up. Identification, characterizing what's in the aquifer, and then also remediation cleanup. So that's Red Hill. But public safety power shutoffs was something I wanted to share with all of you because you know, we just saw a few days ago wildfires on Maui, upcountry. I think it was 500 plus acres. Then on Kauai, where I used to live too, and I love that island, on the west side, Hanapepe area, Kamakani, and it started at a near Hanapepe, a small fire, I think 20 or 30 acres. And the next day it grew into 1,000 acres. it actually shut down the single highway, which is exactly like the Waianae Coast. One highway in, one highway out, from Hanapepe all the way to Kekaha Mana. And that shut that highway down. And the utility there, KIUC, Kauai Islands Utility Corporation, shut power off from near Hanapepe all the way out to the end of the system, to the very west. And it all happened very rapidly. So that's something, you know, that is in our future. And part of it is maybe driven by climate change, but also the changes in vegetation that covers a lot of these lands. When the plantation shut down, they controlled it and they managed it, and they had roads and other things that helped, I think, to keep this threat from getting out of hand. But with the plantations closing many years ago, invasive grasses have taken over, and they're rapid growing, and they've, with dry conditions and high winds, you know, create very dangerous situations. So for Hawaiian Electric, this is kind of what their wildfire safety measures. This is their infographic. It includes, you know, like changing how they operate. Instead of having, if the power goes out and something trips in their distribution system, they don't automatically have it reset to try to maintain electric power or keeping it energized. Because prior to this, I think they were focused on reliable electricity for all of us. But now since Lahaina, they're in the mode of, if it trips, it's going to stay tripped. It's going to stay de-energized until they can actually send an inspector out there to determine if it's a fallen tree on a line, an electric line, or some other problems, or a down pole, because they don't want to inadvertently create a fire. And for the Board of Water Supply, you know, this is ultimately the idea to implement de-energizing circuits or areas in their system. That's a Hawaiian Electric sole decision. But we did get notified back in April, just in passing in a meeting, that they were going to do that come July 1st, the possibility of implementing that from July 1st. Other measures are, you know, strengthening their poles. They're predominantly on wooden poles in their systems, and some of those poles are maybe rated less than 40 miles an hour. And when the winds come at 50, 60 miles an hour, you know, poles may snap and break. Improving the kind of wires they have in the system, maybe undergrounding in strategic areas, and looking at public safety power shutoff, better vegetation management, especially, you know, they have power lines that run over the mountains, the Waianae Mountains and the Ko'olaus, and trying to maintain a clear corridor under those wires, so if the wires fall, there won't be any fire created by that. Also, if trees grow near the power lines or over it, the tree branches, like in Kuli'o'o, I think just recently, in the last few months, you know, East Honolulu suffered a power outage. And I looked at the picture, photo, it looked like a tree branch fell on the power line and brought it down. And that shut off power in East Honolulu, I think, for a few days.
I just want to say that I wish they were, as Helen was saying, had a little bit of your planning sense. They could learn a lot from you guys, and just because a lot of their easements that they have, and you're referring to the trees and stuff, they don't have the manpower, and it's not a high priority. So, yeah, I'm not surprised what happened in Kuli'o'o, and it's going to continue to happen because those easements are not kept up. So.
Yeah, it's a really big challenge. So I think the reality is that we are going to experience power shortages. And right now, for you know, what they're looking at is a power safety power shutoff is a preemptive measure to try to avoid or reduce the risk of wildland fires being created by the electrical utility infrastructure. So preemptively shutting it down when meteorological conditions meet certain criteria, wind speeds, I think like 45 miles an hour or more, and also humidity, 45% or less relative humidity, and also the I think the dry conditions of the vegetation in the area. So it isn't, what we're doing with PSPS, what HECO's doing is not even considering if there's a wildfire, but always remember there could be a wildfire event before or during the PSPS event. And on Kauai, they went into a PSPS, power safety power shutoff, as a response to a wildfire. KIUC, preemptively shut off power on that whole west side of Kauai. This website is also a good source of information. Go to Hawaiian Electric's website, www.hawaiianelectric.com, and just look for safety and outages or public safety power shutoffs. And they continuously update that information, and they're kind of building the airplane as the airplane is being flown here. So it all starts like in this sequence of events. They have what they call incident management teams. These are IMTs. These are like their emergency response team. During this season from July 1st, they have their IMTs kind of ready to be deployed or to be activated, and they'll be monitoring conditions as we enter into conditions that maybe lead toward, there is no yellow flag, there's only a red flag, I think, that the National Weather Service issues, but they're not basing their decision to shut power off on the National Weather Service's action. They're looking at conditions out in the field. And what they've done, and it's publicly available, they've installed weather stations along the leeward coast, and predominantly the PSPS for Oahu is going to be on the Waianae coast, from Nanakuli all the way to Makaha to, I guess they have some power into Ke'au area too, but that's the only high-risk area on Oahu. They are implementing potentially PSPS on Maui, not only Maui Island, but also Molokai, and they're also looking at Hawaii Island, predominantly I think on the West Hawaii side. So just be ready. They'll be monitoring the weather conditions and then making a decision to turn off the power, to de-energize it. And it's going to be done on what they call a circuit. A circuit is like wires that supply a certain region of their service area. It doesn't supply maybe everywhere, but they're like on the Waianae coast, I think they're looking at 6 or 7 circuits. Ray, is it about 6 or 7 circuits that will be impacted? And one of the circuits actually goes over the Waianae Mountains and supplies the Schofield Army Base, part of Schofield's military base there. And if they shut that circuit down, then Schofield will have to generate their own power. Some of the also impacted areas are going to be in Mokuleia, around the airfield area, Mokuleia Ranch, and then the Army system at the airfield are probably going to be without power if they do a PSPS event. Just real succinctly here, we have about 23 facilities on the Waianae coast, and this actually includes a reservoir at the very top of Makakilo. Of that 23 sites, 20 sites will be de-energized if HECO were to de-energize the 6 or 7 circuits on the leeward coast. So basically, we wouldn't have electricity for most of our facilities on the leeward coast. And then once they turn off the power, and when the weather conditions get better, and predominantly what we've been learned from Hawaiian Electric is that they won't send out they'll send out inspectors to go check on each of the wires in each of the circuits, the conductor, what they call conductors, and they'll physically inspect them. But if there's a repair that needs to be done, they won't do the actual repair, because remember, those poles are 50 or 60 feet up in the air. Their bucket trucks don't operate at winds above 30 miles an hour. So until winds drop down to 30 miles an hour or less, they can't safely go and effect those repairs if they're up at the top of the pole level. So that will delay the turning on of the power. So by the time the power comes back on, so if the weather conditions improves and they can say that the PSPS can be ended, they have to go out and physically inspect, do repairs before they turn on the power. So it could be a day or more before they accomplish this, depending on how much repairs they have to do. So once the power gets shut off, it could be off for multiple days. And I think that's where we're trying to encourage people to be prepared for this. And the notice to when HECO's going to shut off the power, we've asked for 1 hour because we want to safely shut off our mechanical electrical equipment, our pumps and motors, without damaging them. But they may not be able to give that to us. It might be even just 15 minutes at best or less. And that'll be the same notice that goes out to the community to let them know. So the incident management team is going to make the decision. They're going to let DEM and I think Board of Water Supply and other critical infrastructure providers know just before they do it. And then we are going to have to respond to that. So this is the timeline. PSPS alert before as weather conditions start to indicate we may get into that point. That's kind of the alert stage, and then happening, they shut out, de-energize, and then also when they can decide they can re-energize based on weather conditions, they don't actually turn the power on until restoration is complete, and restoration's inspection and repairs if necessary. They'll do their best to provide advance notice, but if conditions are suddenly hazardous, they may have to shut off your power with little or no notice. So it's really on all of us to be prepared. So this is in orange are the high-risk areas that they're looking at PSPS on Oahu. Now what's important to know that during these events, remember there are high winds, low humidity, wind gusts, that could be over 40 miles an hour. There may be power outages someplace else on the island, outside the orange area here. But those won't be restored right away too, because they may be out for even for days, like East Honolulu's event. Until they actually, conditions are better, they could actually go out and inspect and do the repair. It was a few days before power came back on for East Honolulu. So at the same time that we may have a PSPS event on Waianae, we might be dealing with localized power outages on other parts of the island. So this is kind of the new normal for us on having to respond to this and deal with it. And what does it mean for the Board of Water Supply? This is the Waianae coast. The hatched areas are the areas in the power shutoff. They've kind of narrowed it a little bit, but majority of our facilities are within the impacted areas where that'll be de-energized. And what we're planning to do, and Cynthia, this is our objective for the BWS is to keep the system running as long as we possibly can. And by deploying generators, at least I think right now we're looking at the minimum 3 generators, 3 well stations to keep the system running pressurized, and if necessary, these pumping units that we can move water from a lower elevation to a higher elevation in the system. So what we've already done, Cynthia, is actually pushed forward some of these assets to be located on the Waianae coast. The challenge of putting them out at the well sites is I don't want them vandalized or stolen because they're expensive assets. Maybe $500,000 per generator. But we're pushing them forward to a secure area that we hope will be keep them safe, so that we don't have to move them from Pearl City at our base yard all the way to the Waianae and Makaha areas. The water system, the customers on the Leeward Coast use anywhere between, say, 9.5 million gallons of water to, during some peak periods, maybe over 11 million gallons a day. So at the same time when this is happening, we're going to immediately go out to our community out there to ask them to conserve water because it helps us. We're going to be at a diminished operational status. We're going to be operating on backup power and also depending on the tunnel flows on the back of Waianae Valley, there are still 2 tunnel sources that are operating without power. They're gravity sources. So between that, the wells that are going to be powered by generators, and also we pump water from Ewa Waipahu along Farrington Highway past Nanakuli to supply parts of the Leeward Coast. We're going to continue to do that because that's outside the PSPS area. Our booster pump is at near Ko'olina. So that'll be it, but we'll need everybody's kokua that lives on that Leeward Coast to only use what you need. And we're asking everybody, and this is good advice to everybody on the island or in the state, be prepared. As if this was a hurricane too, and a hurricane, this situation would be even worse. It would be maybe even for a longer period of time. Be prepared, a 14-day supply of food and water, and this checklist is a good starting place. And information on the PSPS is available at our website or at the Hawaiian Electric's website. And I think that's about all I had. Any questions on the public safety power shutoffs? It is a little scary. It's going to be the first one. They already do it in the western U.S. Quite frequently. Yes.
So will the Board of Water Supply put out a water restriction bulletin at the same time the PSPS goes into effect? And the reason I ask that is because we have idiots that are going to go out and want to wash their car or do something stupid. So if they don't hear a restriction message from Board of Water Supply, they may think, even though you tell them that the water is being pumped, that if water is coming out of the faucet, I can use it. So I just want to make sure that maybe there's dual messages that go out, one from Hawaiian Electric, one from Board of Water Supply to remind them, this doesn't mean go out and wash your car.
Yeah, we'll definitely get a message out quickly once we get word this is coming. And we'll coordinate. It's also important that we coordinate with the communications team of the city too, and with Hawaiian Electric, but we're going to go out and request aggressive conservation measures. And then even when the power comes back, we're going to really make sure that people understand, doesn't mean that if the winds die down, that power is going to come back immediately. It could be a few days before actually the power comes back. So during that whole period of time, we want people to practice water conservation and then restrict car washing, maybe even irrigating your lawn. Some of the challenges are going to be the farmers. They use our water for irrigation to keep their crops alive, so that they should just do what the minimum they need to keep their crops from dying. But good point. And so any way we can work with the community to enlist in getting that word out, even by word of mouth. You know, the coconut wireless is more efficient than the radio, the television. Yeah. Thank you. Other questions or thoughts? So I forgot to mention, we are going to, because this could happen multiple times each summer. And it could happen any year, any summer going out, because HECO's already made that decision. They're going to shut off the power. They're going to have that option available that they're going to mitigate some of the risk of their infrastructure causing a fire that could hurt a lot of people or damage a lot of property. So what we're looking at is applying for federal grants through the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, FEMA funds. I think we need to look at permanent generators being installed at some of the critical wells out on the Leeward Coast that are actually fixed in place, already deployed in a secure building at the site, so that we can have that capability without having to move a mobile generator and hook it up out there. Because this is our new reality. We're entering a new reality here. Any other questions? Yeah, Cynthia.
will that also add to BWS's desire to implement more reservoirs on the Waianae coast, considering we're already short reservoir space? And if you have the reservoirs to equate to 1.5 times our daily usage, that at least gives us a little more leeway.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that. Building water tanks, some of the challenges are finding a site, finding a willing landowner to work with. Then also the capital cost of a new water tank is pretty substantial. So in the near term, it's generators, because we don't have enough generators. You know, earlier, I think, Dave, we got to fact check our numbers. We have about 94 well stations in the system, and about 90 also booster pumping stations, and they all require electricity. So about 180 or so sites in the system. We have about a dozen generators. We've been working to install and purchase more, and we just received, Ray, how many new generators? 2 new generators. Okay, and those were FEMA hazard mitigation grant funds. FEMA paid 75% of we paid the 25% match. And then we have, I think, on order 2 more coming in. We did an emergency procurement given the situation for 2 additional 500 kW generators. Our generators are not the small generators you can go and rent down at Hawthorne, Caterpillar, or Home Depot. Our generators are like 500 kilowatt or 1 megawatt size, because our pumps require a lot of electricity to be able to run our high horsepower pumps and move water around. But we're going to move forward with trying to build more fixed generators at key locations. And more recently, I'm kind of looking at a community in Hauula where they're building a resilience center, trying to make sure we have capacity, because that whole windward area, that area of the coastline, is also easy to be isolated by itself, because the coastal highway is very vulnerable there. And generators in Waianae, maybe another generator. Halava Shaft, we have it shut down. We just finished a permanent fixed generator there. It's such a waste. Maybe we're going to move it to another well to also help supply Honolulu. Maybe our Punanani wells or something.
Really, really fascinating topics, right? And I know this is going to come up again and certainly get incorporated into the Water Master Plan planning. BWS has an update coming up of its risk and resilience assessment. You'll be hearing more about that. Coming meetings. Our last meeting scheduled for 2024 is coming up on Thursday, October 17th. Same time, 4 to 6. Look forward to seeing you all here.